The glass was always in his hand. On stage at the Sands Hotel, on the set of his television show, in movies, in photographs, in every public appearance for 4 decades. That glass, filled with what everyone assumed was whiskey or scotch, became as iconic as the man himself, Dean Martin, the lovable drunk, the crooner who could barely stand straight, the entertainer who slurred his words and stumbled through performances with a drink permanently attached to his fingers. 60 million Americans tuned in every week to watch him sway, to hear him mumble, to laugh at his boozy charm. They loved him for it. They believed every second of it. And every single one of them was wrong. Because the glass that made Dean Martin famous, the drink that defined his entire public persona, wasn't whiskey at all. It was apple juice. To understand the greatest deception in entertainment history, you have to understand what America expected from its stars in the 1950s. This was the era of manufactured perfection. Movie studios controlled every aspect of their actors' lives. Publicists crafted careful images of wholesome family men and virtuous leading ladies. Scandals were buried. Flaws were hidden. The public wanted heroes, not humans. Frank Sinatra was the tough guy with the golden voice. Elvis was the dangerous rebel who secretly loved his mama. Doris Day was America's sweetheart, who never had a bad day in her life. Everyone had an image. Everyone played a role. But Dean Martin did something different, something nobody expected. Instead of pretending to be perfect, he pretended to be flawed. Instead of hiding his weaknesses, he invented one. He created the drunk. And in doing so he pulled off the most brilliant con in show business history. The legend of Dean Martin's drinking began almost by accident. It was 1946. Dean was performing at the 500 Club in Atlantic City with his new partner Jerry Lewis. They were young, hungry, and desperate to stand out in a crowded entertainment landscape. One night, Dean walked on stage holding a glass of what looked like bourbon. He hadn't planned it. He'd simply grabbed a drink from the bar on his way up. Something to his nerves. But something magical happened when that glass was in his hand. He relaxed. Not because of the alcohol. The glass was barely touched all night. But the prop, the visual, the suggestion of looseness, it freed something in Dean Martin. He stopped trying so hard. He let the jokes breathe. He let the silences hang. He became, in that moment, effortlessly cool. Jerry Lewis noticed it immediately. After the show, Jerry pulled Dean aside. "What was different tonight? You were incredible up there." Dean shrugged. "I don't know, I just stopped caring." "The drink," Jerry said, his eyes lighting up with the kind of manic energy that would define his comedy. "It was the drink. People saw you with that glass and they thought you were loose. They relaxed because you looked relaxed." Dean looked at the glass in his hand. It was still almost full. "I barely touched it," he said. Jerry grinned. "They don't know." From that night forward, the glass became part of Dean's act. But what was inside it began to change. By 1950, Dean had discovered something important. Actual alcohol made him sloppy. It dulled his timing. It made him forget lyrics. The real thing was the enemy of the performance. So he started filling his stage glass with apple juice. Sometimes ginger ale. Sometimes just water with a splash of cola for color. The crew knew. His managers knew. But the audience never suspected a thing. Dean perfected the art of appearing drunk without being drunk. The slightly unfocused eyes. The gentle sway. The words that seemed to tumble out almost by accident. Every slur was calculated. Every stumble was choreographed. He was a method actor playing the role of a lifetime. And the role was himself. The Dean Martin Show premiered on NBC in September 9. It would run for 9 seasons, 264 episodes, and become one of the most successful variety shows in television history. And it was built entirely on a lie. Every Thursday night, Dean would stroll onto that stage with his trademark glass. He would crack jokes about being too drunk to remember his lines. He would flirt with the gold diggers, the show's dance troupe, with the loose charm of a man who'd had a few too many. America ate it up. But behind the scenes, the reality was shockingly different. Greg Garrison, the show's producer and director, would later reveal the truth to interviewers. Dean was the most professional performer I ever worked with. He showed up on time. He knew every word of every script. He never needed more than one take. For 9 years, Dean Martin shot his weekly variety show in a single take. No retakes. No corrections. No second chances. Do you know how hard that is? Garrison said. Most performers need 5, 6, 7 takes to get it right. Dean would walk through rehearsal once, maybe twice, and then we'd shoot. One and done. Every single week. The man America thought was too drunk to function was actually the most efficient, most prepared, most disciplined performer in television. But the illusion had to be maintained. The crew of the Dean Martin show was sworn to secrecy. Everyone who worked on that set understood the rules. Never mention that Dean's glass contained apple juice. Never reveal that he barely drank at all. Never destroy the image that made him millions. But secrets have a way of slipping out. One night in 1968, a new stagehand made a mistake. During a commercial break, he grabbed Dean's glass from the side table, thinking he was being helpful. "Mr. Martin, let me freshen your drink," the young man said eagerly. Before anyone could stop him, he took a sip to see what Dean was drinking. His face twisted in confusion. This is apple juice." The set went silent. Crew members froze. Greg Garrison closed his eyes, waiting for the explosion. But Dean just smiled that sleepy, knowing smile. "Of course it is, kid," he said, his voice low enough that the studio audience couldn't hear. "You think I could do this every week for 4 years if I was really drinking?" He took the glass back, patted the stagehand on the shoulder, and walked back to his mark. "Now get me a fresh one, and keep your mouth shut." The stagehand never told anyone. Not until decades later, long after Dean was gone. The question everyone asked, once the truth came out, was simple. Why would Dean Martin, one of the most talented performers of his generation, build his entire public persona around a lie? Why pretend to be something he wasn't? The answer goes back to Steubenville, Ohio, 1917. Dino Paul Crocassetti was born into an Italian immigrant family that spoke no English. His father, Guy, was a barber, whose shop was a front for illegal gambling. His mother, Angela, worked her fingers to the bone keeping the family fed. Dean didn't learn English until he was 5 years old. When he started school, the other kids mocked his accent, his clothes, his immigrant strangeness. He learned early that being different meant being a target. So he learned to hide. He learned to deflect. He learned that if people were laughing with you, they couldn't laugh at you. The class clown became the lounge singer, became the movie star. But the defense mechanism never changed. Dean Martin built walls around himself. He kept everyone at arm's length, with jokes and charm and that perpetual haze of apparent intoxication. The drunk act wasn't just entertainment, it was armor. "If people think you're drunk," Dean once told his son, "they don't expect too much from you, they forgive your mistakes. They don't ask hard questions, they just enjoy the show." It was the philosophy of a man who had learned as a child that vulnerability was dangerous. Dean Paul Martin, Dean's son, was one of the few people who knew the whole truth. In interviews after his father's death, Dean Paul spoke openly about the deception. "My father was not a big drinker," he said. "I know that sounds crazy to people who watched him on TV every week. But it's the truth. He might have a glass of wine with dinner, maybe a beer on the golf course. But the heavy drinking, the stumbling around, that was all an act." Dean Paul remembered watching his father prepare for performances. He would rehearse everything, every joke, every song, every bit of physical comedy. The stumble here, the slur there, it was all planned. He was a perfectionist disguised as a drunk. The irony was bitter. Dean Martin, who made a career out of appearing not to care, actually cared more than almost anyone in the business. "That's what made him so good," Dean Paul said. "He made it look effortless, because he worked so hard at it. The drunk thing was a smokescreen. It let people underestimate him, and he liked it that way." The few people who got close to Dean behind the scenes all told the same story. Shirley MacLaine, who worked with Dean on multiple films, described him as the most professional actor I ever knew. He showed up knowing his lines, everyone's lines, and the entire shooting schedule, she said. Then he'd crack a joke about needing a drink, and everyone would laugh. "But I watched him on set. The glass was always full at the end of the day. He never touched. John Wayne, who starred with Dean in Rio Bravo and several other westerns, was more direct. "Dean's a fraud," Wayne said with a grin. "The best kind of fraud. He makes you think he's barely conscious, and then he delivers a perfect take every single time. I've worked with a lot of actors who actually drink. They're a nightmare. Dean's a pro." Even Frank Sinatra, Dean's closest friend and fellow Rat Pack member, admitted the truth late in his life. "Dean never really drank that much," Sinatra said. "Not compared to me anyway. But don't tell anyone. It would ruin his reputation." The drunk act had consequences Dean never anticipated. As the years went on, the line between performance and perception became increasingly blurred. People who met Dean for the first time expected the stumbling, slurring character from television. When they encountered the quiet, reserved, stone-cold sober real man, they were disappointed. "He's not like he is on TV," they would complain. Dean heard this criticism his entire career, and it hurt more than he ever let on. He had created a character so convincing that it had consumed his actual identity. The real Dean Martin, the thoughtful introvert, who preferred golf and solitude to parties and crowds, was invisible. Nobody wanted to see him. They wanted the drunk, so he gave them the drunk. Night after night, year after year, for 40 years, he put on the costume, picked up the glass, and performed the character that America loved. And somewhere along the way, he lost himself inside it. There was another cost to the deception, a cost measured in respect. Despite his enormous success, despite the hit records and the box office smashes and the television ratings, Dean Martin was never taken seriously as an artist. Critics dismissed him as a lightweight. Award committees overlooked him. Serious actors looked down on him. The drunk act worked too well. People believed it so completely that they couldn't see the talent underneath. This bothered Dean more than he admitted. "You know what's funny?" he once said to his daughter Dina. "I work harder than any of them. I rehearse more. I prepare more. And they think I just roll out of bed and wing it." He shook his head. "Maybe I'm too good at this." Dina later wrote about this moment in her memoir. She described her father as a man caught in a trap of his own making. The persona that had brought him fame had also brought him dismissal. "He wanted to be respected," Dina wrote. "But the drunk act made that impossible. People couldn't respect someone they thought was perpetually intoxicated. And my father was too proud to break character and tell them the truth. So he carried on, sipping apple juice, pretending to be someone he wasn't, hiding in plain sight." The mask finally began to slip in the late 1980s. After Dean Paul died in the plane crash in 1987, Dean Martin stopped caring about the performance. He stopped caring about much of anything. The television appearances dried up. The nightclub shows ended. Dean retreated to his Beverly Hills home and stayed there, a ghost haunting his own life. When he did venture out, usually to his favorite Italian restaurant, the drunk act was gone. There was no more stumbling, no more slurring, no more pretending. What people saw instead was a quiet old man drinking wine with his dinner. Nothing excessive, nothing performative, just a lonely father eating alone at a corner table, stone cold sober and heartbroken. "That's when I realized," said one longtime restaurant staff member. "All those years, all that stuff on TV, it was all fake. This was the real Dean Martin, and he was nothing like I expected." Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. He was 78 years old. In the obituaries and tributes that followed, the drunk legend persists. Writers spoke of his legendary drinking. Television retrospectives showed clip after clip of his famous stumbles and slurs. But those who knew him told a different story. "He fooled everyone," Greg Garrison said. "For 40 years he fooled the entire country. And he did it on purpose. That's not the act of a drunk. That's the act of a genius." Shirley MacLaine agreed. "Dean was the smartest performer I ever met. He understood something that most actors never figure out. He understood that the audience doesn't want perfection. They want humanity. They want flaw. So he gave them a flaw. He just made sure it was a fake one." The legacy of Dean Martin's deception raises uncomfortable questions about fame, authenticity, and the masks we all wear. Was Dean Martin a fraud, or was he simply a professional doing his job? The answer perhaps is both. He created a character that audiences loved. He maintained that character with discipline and dedication that would shame most method actors. He never broke, never slipped, never let the mask fall until he was too broken by grief to keep wearing it. In a sense, Dean Martin was the ultimate performer. He didn't just play a role on stage and screen, he played a role in life, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For 40 years, the drunk was fiction, but the performance was real. Today, the glass that Dean Martin carried on stage sits in a private collection. It's an ordinary rocks glass, nothing special about it. But if you look closely, you can see faint residue at the bottom. Not whiskey, not scotch, apple juice. The king of cool's greatest secret, hiding in plain sight all along. Dean Martin built an empire on a lie. He became one of the biggest stars in the world by pretending to be something he wasn't, and he took that secret to his grave, or tried to, but the truth has a way of coming out. And the truth about Dean Martin is this: the drunk was an act, the laziness was an act, the I don't care attitude was an act. The only thing that was real was the talent, raw, extraordinary, disciplined talent, that he hid behind a glass of apple juice and a manufactured stumble. That's the thing about Dean, Jerry Lewis said late in his life, decades after their partnership ended. Everyone thought he was the luckiest guy in show business. Natural talent, no effort, everything handed to him. Jerry shook his head. They had no idea how hard he worked, no idea how much he prepared, no idea that the whole thing was a performance. He smiled, that familiar Jerry Lewis grin. Dean Martin was the greatest actor I ever knew, and his greatest role was Dean Martin. 40 years of fooling 60 million people every single week. The drunk who never drank, the slob who was a perfectionist, the lazy man who worked harder than anyone. That's the real story of Dean Martin, not the legend, not the character, the man. And the man, it turns out, was stone cold sober the whole time. That's not just a twist. That's the greatest long con in entertainment history. The glass was always in his hand, but what was inside it? That's the joke Dean Martin played on all of, and somewhere, wherever he is, he's probably still laughing about it.